Thank you, Ashley, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. I think this is a terrific event. I think we all understand that we face a very significant challenge in the form of climate change. For those of you here in the room, I commend to you the display we have here at the U.S. Center, the globe, which throughout the day has a really stunning and graphic illustration of some of the trends we're seeing in climate change around the globe, on oceans, on the atmosphere. And it's visually arresting, and I think also really dramatically underscores the nature of the challenge that we have. So the president has made climate change a very top priority of his, and I've been working for him on trying to move our domestic agenda forward. We've been taking decisive steps at home in the U.S., along with international partners, including releasing earlier this year the Clean Power Plan. That's the largest step the U.S. has ever taken to combat climate change. That will reduce emissions from the power sector, our biggest source of greenhouse gas emissions, 32% by 2030. And so that action, coupled with doubling fuel economy standards for vehicles, establishing the first ever fuel economy standards for medium and heavy duty trucks, developing and implementing a strategy to reduce methane emissions, just a few of the many steps we're taking to drive innovation and progress in reducing emissions in the U.S. And I want to thank Ceres and its coalition members for supporting us in that agenda and many of those specific actions that we're taking. I think that the title of our panel today really underscores what I think is a hugely important set of commitments and activities that have occurred in the run-up to Paris, something that Ceres has been at the heart of for years, which is bringing corporate leadership to bear on the climate problem. And so just over the last few months, 154 countries signed the American Business Act on Climate Pledge. That's a pledge for a strong outcome here in Paris, paired with commitments that companies are taking to reduce their emissions and move to more sustainable practices. Those companies represent more than $4.2 trillion in annual revenue, have operations in all 50 U.S. states, and employ nearly 11 million people. And so I think what we've seen in the U.S., and I think what we're seeing around the world, is that when you combine policies like those that I described, put frameworks in place, you'll see that companies are stepping forward and they'll take leadership, and that we can work to solve this problem. So just since the president took office, the generation of electricity from wind power has more than tripled in the U.S. The generation of electricity from solar power has increased by more than 30-fold since 2008. So dramatic progress in some areas. Corporate leadership is a huge, huge part of that. And just this past Sunday, President Obama joined with other world leaders in announcing mission innovation to dramatically accelerate global clean energy innovation to address climate change. 20 countries representing more than 80% of the world's current R&D investment are committing to double their respective investment over the next 5 years. And alongside that, as I said, we have strong commitment from the companies represented here on the panel. And so I think what we're seeing is huge momentum from corporate leaders around the world to sustainability. And I just commend this panel, and I commend the work of Ceres in the run-up to Paris and for many years to encourage this kind of activity. So with that, I'll turn it back to Ashley. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan. Now I'd like to turn it over to our moderator for the event, and probably the person responsible for making sure that this event happened and that these companies got here today. I'd like to introduce Mindy Lubber, who is the president of Ceres. Ceres is a nonprofit organization mobilizing business leadership on climate change and other global issues. She directs Ceres Investor Network on climate risk, and also coordinates Ceres Business for Innovative Climate and Energy Policy, BICEP Coalition. Mindy.
Great. Thank you, Dan, and thanks to all the folks who are here and for all who are joining us online as this is being streamed live right here from Paris. I'm going to give a very short opening as to what we're going to do here, and then jump right in with 5 of the most impressive human beings I've had the opportunity to work with. We're at COP. we're looking at and thinking about a global deal. And what is different here in Paris than I would argue was the case in Copenhagen or prior efforts is the voice of capital market leaders, is the voice of the largest companies and investors around the world who are here to say acting on climate is not only the right thing and a must thing to do for our environment, for the future of our children, small issue like are we delivering a planet that is safe and healthy. It is crucial to deliver a commitment for national defense, for public health, but what the leaders here are standing up for, both on this panel and across the discussions here in Paris, is about why acting on climate is an imperative for the economy as well. Why acting on climate within companies and with investments is about building a clean economy future, which is the only future in front of us, a future that will bring jobs, a future that will bring equity and profits and value to moving forward. It's not every day that some of the leaders of the largest companies stand up together and not only say we're going to change our own practices, we're going to reduce our carbon footprint, we're going to invest more in clean energy, and we're going to stand up and support policy at a state level, at a federal level, and here globally in Paris. What we have with us, or who we have with us today, are people who are doing it in all aspects of what they do every day. So let me quickly jump in. I'm going to introduce people one by one, meaning I'll introduce them and then ask a question, but we'll have some give and take for the full hour that we have here together. I'm going to start with a colleague, Jack Enos, who is the head of not a company in this instance, but the second or third largest, I think we go back and forth, of the large institutional investors, the public pension funds, and in this case, Jack represents the California Teachers Pension Fund, well over $230 or $40 billion that they manage. Jack has been at this as a leader within the financial community, calling for action on climate. I'm going to ask Jack to tell you a tiny bit about what he does, and then to ask the question, or ask him to answer the question, why are you here, and what do you think is going on? How can you make a difference?
Great, thanks. There we go. First of all, running a pension scheme means that we're investing those billions of dollars for decades and decades in perpetuity. So our interest in the time horizon of investing is quite different than the short-term market traders that we all often hear about in the news. For us, investing in several of these companies here means that we're going to be in a long-term relationship and hopefully be part of their success in the long run. So to the extent anything in the market, any economic force creates unusual volatility or unusual risk for an investor, that's of concern. So for a long time, this has been an issue which we know intuitively that climate risk poses a direct threat to many of the investments that we make as a pension fund. What's different, I would say, is over time we've gotten more wisdom, more maturity in understanding the nature of those risks and actually starting to model those risks in our investment portfolios and stress test those portfolios. So at CalSTRS, when we look at the different policy options, whether or not policies are met and converge at a 2-degree agreement or other forms of those agreements, as we model different versions of those scenarios, we in fact see the impact on our investment portfolios. And in some of those cases, those involve significant losses to investors. If those losses are realized, that means they're losses to these companies here that are listed as well, because obviously we share in the wins and we share in the losses going forward. So in order for us to ultimately be successful as a pension fund, we have to understand better how to mitigate those risks and how to get policy that brings certainty to the financial marketplace. So that's why this is so important for us.
Great. Jack Enos not only is an incredible leader within CalSTRS, but he is a leader within our investor network on climate risk, 113 investors who are trying to come together and follow his lead and work together on changing where they invest, what they invest in, and what policy measures they support. Jack, I'm going to ask you one or two more questions, and then we're going to move on. You were part of the leadership of getting the SEC to mandate the disclosure of climate risk.
Right.
Why is it so important to have that information?
Well, there is a lot of good reporting going on. Clearly, most major corporations are doing some form of sustainability reporting. But what's important to an investor, and what we're talking about risk, is actually material risk in a company. And frankly, many people have different interpretations and different views of that. So having regulatory bodies and listing companies and the various stock exchanges as well, starting to really look more seriously at consistent, clear disclosures for investors, that is one of the most important things we can do from our perspectives. So that when we look at the financial statements of these companies, and too often we're thinking about energy companies here, but look who's up at the table with us today. These aren't energy companies. We care about, as investors, how these risks affect the entire broad economy and what we do. So having disclosure standards defined well is absolutely critical.
Great.
Sorry, Mindy, just one, and for our international audience, if we could just explain what the SEC is, just really quickly.
Absolutely. As Jacqueline has just said, voluntary reporting is growing in the United States and around the world. About 7,800 companies do sustainability reports using the Global Reporting Initiative, a standard we set and designed that series and launched. But in certain instances, and for investors in particular, getting information about the risks companies face as it relates to climate change or any other material risk or financial risk is important to have that within the normal financial filings. In the United States, the Securities and Exchange Commission, otherwise known as the SEC, requires that. It's not being done quite as well as we would like, but as Jack said, it is important for investors before they make an investment to know when they're putting a company in their portfolio, when they're investing in it, what the risks are that that company faces. Then Jack's investment officials could figure out, do we want to invest or not? Data is important in this case, and particularly important, which is why we've worked with the Securities and Exchange Commission and as well with the stock exchanges around the world to get mandatory reporting for sustainability issues. Hasn't happened everywhere yet, but we're on our way and look forward to working with everybody.
And Mandy, just to add that, that's the view from the investor side. I think from the business side of this as well, in fairness to their interests, this currently chaotic world we have of all kinds of reporting on different issues is difficult for businesses. I think as a community of advocacy, we need to have a much clearer, defined, concise ask of what's important to an investor for reporting. So it creates a much more efficient model for both sides, so that we're talking about the things that matter and not talking about the things that don't matter.
Exactly, and that's exactly what we're all working about on globally. Let me move to Letitia Webster, who is with VF Corp, also a member of our coalition BICEP Businesses for Innovative Climate and Energy Policy. For those of you who don't know what VF Corp is, many of us know what North Face is or what Timberland is. They are the parent company of many, many of our household companies. We all purchase their products all over the world. Letitia, it's great to be here. I know you were 7 months pregnant and probably freezing in Copenhagen, standing online. Good for you for enduring that one, which tells me you've been at this for a long time and you'll go to great lengths to see climate policy put in place. Tell me what has changed. Why are you feeling optimistic or not at this moment in time?
We want this done before kids go to college.
Right, yeah, exactly. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having us. We're really pleased to be here. Like Mindy said, VF is about a $12.5 billion company. We have 62,000 employees and operations in 150 countries. We buy 1% of the world's cotton. Climate change matters to us from the farm to the mountaintop, and we're seeing those impacts, and we need to have them stop. So I am very serious, as is VF, about how we can get strong policy to help mitigate and adapt to these issues. So the things I think that are different here from Copenhagen is how the US leadership has really invoked the businesses in this conversation, and really the change of approach. I think from this top down, UN approach to more of a bottoms-up approach where the countries could actually develop goals that were meaningful to them. And then the leadership, and the U.S. leadership specifically, really has worked hard at reaching out to businesses to get their input. And I think that's one of the most important changes. I also think that, you know, there is just such a huge push from businesses. They feel engaged. They feel that the policymakers and the delegates want to hear from them. And I think that is really changing the tide, because before it was a vocal minority who were kind of saying, no, this isn't right. And now there is, you know, pretty much almost all businesses are out here saying, no, we need a strong climate policy. This is going to make a difference, and we actually have to have it happen. And I think more specifically, it's good for business. And I think that's the message that really needs to be sent across the Atlantic, is that this is actually really good for business. And once we unleash, I think, the billions, if not trillions of dollars that are available to technology, that's really where we can get the U.S. economy going, and we can unleash U.S. entrepreneurship. So I think that's the difference, is that we're at this, like, literally this pinnacle. And I'm very optimistic. I think this is really going to be a successful COP.
Great. We love the optimism. I'm going to ask you to answer two more questions. I'll ask both right now. The first is, you just took the White House Business Pledge. Tell me what it is you're doing at VF that made you stand up and make that commitment, a commitment we know you'll follow through on. The second thing is U.S. policy. And here, of course, we're talking about global policy, but moving the United States is important. You've been right in the thick of it. How do you think that's going at a state level and federal level?
Sure. In terms of signing the pledge, I think it was important for a couple different reasons. One is we committed to 100% renewable energy by 2025. We believe strongly that it's good for our business. Our CFO has said it's a no-regret action. We think this will actually help protect our financial stability. It's good for our consumers and our customers. It's really good for our brands. We wanted to express our support as a business and add our voice, again, to the business community to help the U.S. in these policy negotiations and say, again, businesses believe in this. And it was really important for us to be able to support the U.S. in doing that. In terms of policy, I mean, I think, again, we're at a tipping point. I think there are obviously some challenges, a little bit from our state in North Carolina. One of the reasons, again, we feel it's important to be vocal. We tend to be kind of a quieter behind the scenes business, especially because we're a parent company. But again, our brands are some of the most iconic outdoor brands in the world. When you're dealing with Vans, Nautica, Reef, North Face, Timberland, our consumers expect us to do this. Our customers, our investors are actually asking us what we're doing around climate change and policy. And we think it's important for a company who is as fiscally responsible as VF. We are very conservative when it comes to these matters, but this is something that we feel our voice needs to be heard. And a strong conservative, financial voice needs to be heard, and that the business community believes in this, and it's good for business. I mean, that's the message. I mean, as simple as it is, this is good for business. We need strong policy to direct our investments. If we're going to meet our 100% goal by 2025, we have to have the policy in place.
Great. And that's what we're hearing all across Paris at the climate negotiations, that businesses and investors are here in force because acting on climate is one of the most compelling things we can do to build a better economy around the world. That was great, Letitia. Thank you. Now we've got somebody representing this little small company. I'm going to mention the company first. I don't know if any of you have heard of it, but it's called Facebook. Well, perhaps a few of us have heard of it, including our kids and their kids. Bill Wheel has been a formidable expert in energy, a leader in corporate social responsibility or energy responsibility, and has done more than anyone I could think of at trying to move small enterprises like Facebook to change and change quickly. Bill, you guys are a major purchaser of renewable energy. I'm sure it had nothing to do with your efforts. But no, you have led this in so many places. How did you convince your colleagues to take as strong a position and go as strongly for renewable energy as you have?
So in some ways it was easy, in some ways it wasn't. I think the key was first getting people on board with the moral argument that this is really the right thing to do, that our users, the people on Facebook, care about it and demand it, but also our employees care about it and demand it, and I think many investors do as well. But the real key was making clear that we could do this in a way that made really good business sense. So we made a commitment several years ago that long-term we want to be 100% renewable energy. 3 years ago, we set the goal for this year of being at 25% renewables. We will surpass that.
Wow.
A few months ago, we doubled that to 50% in 2018. And that's a stretch. We might make it. We might miss it. If we miss it, I don't think we'll miss it by much. But we're basically stair-stepping our way toward that long-term 100% renewable goal. And the goal is to increase the percentage of renewables, which we need to do and which the grid needs to do, and to decrease our carbon footprint over time. But I think that doing that in a way that makes good business sense, where the economics work out well, convincing our management that we could do that was really critical. And I think the clear message is you can. And as an economy, I think we need to make the transition, and we need to trust that we can figure out how to do it well and economically sensibly.
Great. And the key thing here is not only are these investors and corporate leaders sitting at this dais talking about policy, but they're digging in and changing what happens with their own enterprises, which is a crucial message. But Bill, you do take it further. You work with state energy officials on procuring renewables, and the leverage of Facebook is not insignificant. What are you seeing? How is that work with the states going?
Well, we have been working in the states where we've located data centers. We worked in Iowa to get a new 140 megawatt wind farm built as part of our decision to locate a data center there. We just broke ground on a data center in Texas, and there's a new 200 megawatt wind farm that's being built to supply that data center when it comes online. But I think even more important, we do have some influence and some leverage, though we're not, we reach a lot of people around the world, but as a company, in terms of our operations, we're not actually that big. But collectively, us and Mars and VF and others have enormous influence and enormous leverage as a collective body of purchasers. And one of the things that I think is most interesting and most promising over the last few years that has come up is a number of us, I think there are now 44 companies have signed what's called the Corporate Renewable Energy Buyers Principles. There are another several dozen companies that are involved in a broader partnership around corporate purchasing of renewables, and the goal is to scale corporate purchasing much faster. Part of that involves working with state policymakers, with utilities, with regulators, with governors to change policies so we actually have the options to meet our aggressive renewable energy goals.
Great. And great message. I mean, there's no question working collectively and collaboratively makes sense, whether it's 30 or 40 companies purchasing renewable energy. To my left is a banner looking at well over 100 companies. They put their names in the Wall Street Journal talking about acting on climate and stepping up and moving the climate debate further. And think about this. If 10% of our Fortune 500 companies over the next 5 years commits to 100% renewable, we're jump-starting that industry and pushing it forward in ways that nobody expected. And if we have policy changes coming out of Paris, the impact of that could be tenfold, as Bill was talking about. So much to do, and all of it about the opportunity of addressing climate change. I want to go now to another colleague, friend, leader, Rochelle Wegner from Dignity Health, also a member of Ceres Business Coalition on Policy. Start with, you're a healthcare company, so you're not a major emitter of carbon, although certainly we all are. What is Dignity Health doing on the healthcare front here at the COP? And how are you looking at the climate problem? And finally, why are you pressing so hard for a global deal?
Thank you, Mindy. It's a pleasure to be here with you and my colleagues here. A little bit about Dignity Health. We are one of the largest healthcare systems in the United States. We have about 400 care facilities, and our footprint spans across 21 states. We have acute care facilities, mostly in California, with some in Arizona and Nevada as well. We are an economic engine in the communities that we serve. We have about 59,000 employees and are affiliated with 9,000 physicians. In fiscal year 15, we did provide $2 billion in community benefits and care to the poor, and our assets reach over $17 billion. So we are a business in every which way, and we are a healing mission. It is our mission to promote health and healing, and we know that we can't have healthy people and healthy communities without a healthy planet. There's no denying that climate change is a public health issue, and really we take to heart that healthcare has a serious obligation, a moral obligation to certainly protect public health and to first do no harm. We see and witness every day in our hospitals the suffering that people experience because of climate change impacts. We are well aware of the direct and indirect impacts of climate change to health, and we certainly are seeing how climate change is exacerbating the social and economic determinants of health, such as clean air, safe drinking water, sufficient food, secure shelter, and I would add uninterrupted employment to this list. And we just know that these projections are going to get worse over time. As a healthcare system, we certainly need to recognize that we must mitigate our own climate impacts, and we need to become more climate resilient and be a leader, be an example to all other hospitals and businesses alike. This is an important issue to us, not only because we understand the health and the business nexus to this, but because our very own healthcare system, the sustainability of our healthcare system depends on us acting on climate change. We are in the midst of healthcare reform, and we are very challenged to bring down costs, elevate quality of care, and to also improve population health. And I would submit, Mindy, that we will not be able to successfully transform the healthcare system if we do not address climate change.
Well, it's great having you as a leader on bringing about a global deal, whether it's for the economy, for the health. This is about our very future of our families from every perspective possible. I'm going to turn to Kevin Rabinovitch, also a member of our policy organization, BICEP. Kevin represents another one of these small companies that many of us, if not all of us, have heard of, Mars. Mars Candy. Mars has many products, but I think we think about M&Ms and other things when we think about Mars. Kevin, Mars is committed to 100% renewable energy over the next short period of time. Tell me a little bit about how you made that decision, what it means for Mars, and how you were able to make the business case.
Sure. Thanks, Mindy. First off, I'm just referencing back to your intro. When these 5 amazing human beings get here, by all means, let us know so we can meet them. Looking forward to that. So thanks everyone for attending and for participating here. A little bit about Mars. So as Mindy mentioned, we are a food business. We are privately owned. So unfortunately, Jack's not able to invest in our company. We're a little over 33 billion in sales. We're all over the world. We have 140 factories, 75,000 associates. Very large scale business. Our approach to climate and renewable energy and GHG emissions really starts with the science. So the approach that we took was when we began looking at this first in 2007, we said, what is climate science, which is, after all, the reason we're having discussion about this in the first place, is because a lot of good science has been done about the impacts of climate change. What does climate science say would be necessary to avoid some of the undesirable consequences that some of the others have talked about? And conveniently enough, the signal's pretty clear. Back then the number was 80% by 2050. More recent versions of the IPCC's publications have some slightly different numbers. But we looked at that number and we took that number as a provocation in our strategy and target setting process. So we didn't just say, well, that's what the scientist said has to happen, so therefore that's the target, end of story, off we go. We took it as provocation into our strategy setting process and said, what would it take? Could we? If that's what we have to do, if that's what we have to deliver, what do we have to do to get there? And that led us to developing a strategy for our own direct operations, which is about 100% reduction in our emissions by 2040. So that's not just electricity, that's electrical and thermal, all of our direct operations. And the reason we were able to get to that as a target is we realized that the things that we had done, working on efficiency, which is something we'd done for a long time, that doing more of that was good, but it was never going to get to where the science said you needed to get to. So we said we need to do something else, and something else ended up being renewable energy. And as we started digging into it, we realized that there were real opportunities to do renewable energy at scale, and that we could actually then talk about getting to 100% reduction for our direct operations. So the provocation of the science actually led us to new strategies, which then made what seemed like an impossible target possible, because we identified that that's what we want to go after. If we had started talking just about feasibility, we never would have been able to make that commitment. We never would have launched a renewable energy strategy. So I think that idea of start with the science and use it, not as something that's frightening and intimidating, but as a provocation and a prompt to drive innovation, is a really powerful approach that we've found that we think is replicable by others. I think one of the things that I think business can offer to the policymaking dialogue is two things. So one is that approach, that idea, and then I think another one is recognition that we are finding ways to solve these problems by tackling them as business problems. And I think that should provide a level of comfort and confidence to policymakers that there are ways to solve these problems, and there are people and businesses and entities motivated to try and solve these problems. And there's a role that policymakers can play in helping support that.
Well, Kevin, it's exactly what we're hearing, but it's your leadership and those of people up here who have said time and time again, addressing climate is about building an economy that will last, that will survive, that will be about jobs, and be about strengthening our economy. And you couldn't have made the case better. I'm going to put Jack on the spot because you said he couldn't invest in you. Jack, buy some of those M&Ms. You could personally invest if your portfolios aren't full of our privately held company up here in Mars.
Yeah, by all means, there's ways to support us, even other than investing.
We're going to call it investing in you, and no doubt many of us have. Let's open it up to the floor, see if we've got some questions.
Okay. Should we take a couple at once?
That would be best.
That'd be
Let's take 2 or 3 at once.
Let's take one here and one there.
Justin Catanoso, mangabay.com. I'd like to direct this question to Jack. So you talked about efficiencies, you talked about lots of things you're doing, and you didn't give a lot of concrete examples. And I'd like to hear some concrete examples of what you guys are doing to get to 100% beyond solar. Give us some real specific things you're doing in your factories and what you're doing across your value chain.
And just hold that thought real quick.
Just to check, I think you meant for Kevin, not Jack. Okay. He's sweating over here going, I didn't talk about efficiency.
Although he's doing a lot on efficiency, Jack.
Hi, thank you, Sirius, for putting on a great panel. Mike Green from the Climate Action Business Association up in Boston. My question is kind of contextualized in national policy, but totally relates to what's happening here. Since the Obama's first election, we've seen this explosion of sustainable business groups across our country and businesses pledging to take action. At the same time, we've seen more Republicans get elected into public positions and are all standing there saying, we're representing business. So what's happening here? Because it's definitely playing a strong role in how the U.S. is acting on in the climate talks here.
Okay, we're going to start with Kevin, who's going to answer the question about energy efficiency and other specifics, and then we'll come back to politics. We'll try and keep it at small p politics, but we'll take it on nevertheless.
I'll be glad to answer that one after this.
Great.
So thanks for the question. Yeah, so the lack of specificity in my initial answer was more to keep myself to time, but now you've given me some extra time with the microphone, so thank you. So we have, as I mentioned, manufacturing operations all over the world, and a lot of those factories are doing similar things to other factories in other parts of the world. So one of the things that our policy on trying to get to zero emissions has driven is a lot more intentionality and a lot more focus on energy and on energy efficiency. We are not an especially energy intensive business. Energy makes up a relatively small part of our profit and loss statement. So consequently, it doesn't get, or historically hasn't gotten as much attention as some of the other bigger hitters from a financial perspective. But this becomes an extra reason to focus on it, and sort of like anything else you work on, the more you focus, the more you see. So we found a lot of opportunities, particularly around our utilities. So, more efficient ways to make steam, ways to recover waste energy from processes, ways to take the waste heat from an air compressor and use it to preheat the water that's going into the boiler. Getting very technical, but there's a lot of things there where there's a lot of opportunities. Probably the most interesting thing around efficiency that we've seen is the motivating power of a climate-based target and using that as the starting point for discussion about energy efficiency. If your discussion about energy efficiency is, we need to save $100,000, and you get a bunch of people from the factory together in the room and say, right, our job today is brainstorm ways to find, to save $100,000. People care, they're excited, they're motivated because they work for the business, and if the business does well, they do well. But there's one level of engagement when they walk out in the factory and look for uninsulated pipes and things when they're trying to save money. Bring those same people into the room and say, Mars is committed to climate science. We care about the future of our children and our communities. So we've got these targets that are about climate change, and you step your way down and go, and the thing we here today can do to contribute to those is go look for energy efficiency because that drives down our emissions and right? People knock the doors off the conference room on their way out into the factory because they're so excited. They're still going and looking at the same things, but the level of motivation is much higher, and consequently they find things that they wouldn't have found otherwise. A little bit of specifics on the renewable. So the biggest thing we've done is we signed a 20-year deal for a 200 megawatt wind farm in Texas in the US. And the only reason it was 200 megawatts is that's what we needed to cover 100% of our electrical usage in the US. If we had more factories in the US, it would have been a 300 megawatt. If we had less factories, it'd be 100 megawatt. So we sometimes get sort of megawatt envy talking to people like Facebook who, 200 here and 150 there. And, but yeah, so that's what we did because that was 100% of our electricity in the US. We're now hard at work on the next several countries where we will do something similar. We also have a lot of on-site smaller projects, but that's the big rock. Maybe
Great. I'm going to reinterpret the other question and ask several of our panelists to speak to it. The interpretation that I'm going to take, just to remind people, since it was 3 minutes ago, is that there seems to be in parts of the world and in the United States at the moment that blue states or democratic states support climate change and red states don't, or environmentalists do, or businesses don't. And that message appears to be changing. We've got business leaders from every part of the world, financial leaders, who are looking at climate as one of the most positive drivers of the economy. And is that message getting through to our policymakers? What are you thinking, seeing? Jack, we'll start with you.
I was going to answer the energy efficiency question too. Can I do that for 1 minute?
Go for it.
I was going to do both those.
I
just want to mention, because from an investor standpoint, energy efficiency is that low-hanging fruit. And for the last 3 years, that's been actually our signature engagement effort at CalSTRS. This year, we put together a collaborative effort with ClimateWorks of Australia to actually scrub our portfolio and go through and identify those companies in 5 industry sectors that have the greatest opportunity for improvement. And through that process, we've really tagged those companies will be on our focus list, the ones we will work closest to, that we're invested in, with significant investments to work on energy efficiency. So what I like is what's changed in the dialogue is from broad generalizations about these are important things, these are things you need to do, to really detailed metrics we have around these things that identify which companies in the portfolio will yield the most opportunity for us as investments. So that's a wonderful area to focus on. On the policy issue, I was going to answer a little bit differently, and just that, again, I want to point out again that from an investor standpoint, this has to be a win-win alignment with the companies we invest in. And to the extent that, obviously you've got some very progressive individuals on this panel, and you can see by the richness of the dialogue that led them to these actions in their companies, that they're having that dialogue at the highest levels of their corporations. That isn't something that we see in all corporations in the United States, so that is of concern to us when there isn't effective governance doing that. And then the political side of it is, to the extent companies are not engaging in are engaging in political activity that is not aligned with investor interests, that's of concern to us. We take a harsh view on that, because ultimately, if we're losing money, that's because the company's not performing well. So we're very concerned when we see that type of, what we say, contrarian political activity to the interests of the investor community.
Great. Bill, Letitia, you want to touch?
I think we're in the Renaissance, right? And I think some people are still in the dark ages, and change is hard. And I think there are a lot of businesses out there who are very scared about how they're going to win in this new economy. And they're a vocal minority. They have a loud voice. And unfortunately, what we've heard is they have, been able to vocalize that concern. That is so much why all of us and BICEP and Ceres has been so important, is to really try and amplify the business voice with the Wall Street Journal ad. The apparel ad came out just the other day, where 8 of the largest CEOs in the apparel footwear industry came out and said, we need strong climate change policy. We want our voices to be heard, because unfortunately, we've been too quiet. And I think that was the problem leading up to Copenhagen, is businesses were too quiet. And I think that it's also kind of a lack of, just to be honest, a vision of really understanding, and this is where I think the businesses can come in, is say, we can show you the bridge. We can show you how to bridge from literally the dark ages in the old economy to this new high-tech, clean, renewable economy. It's not scary, it's exciting, and frankly, it can fuel the U.S. economy with green jobs, because frankly, there's developing worlds out there, developing countries out there begging for technology, and we can deliver it at the U.S. And I think, I really hope that U.S. leaders can understand this can be a huge win-win, and it will create jobs. And from our perspective as a business, we think that's really the best path forward. And so that's why we're here raising our voices. I don't know why other people are getting elected, and some of that's for other people to discuss, but we really hope that the U.S. leadership hears our voice loud and clear.
Great. Bill.
Just quickly, I think this transition to a low carbon, zero carbon economy is inevitable. The question is not if, but when, and I think we need to do it as quickly as we can. I think the actions that we're all taking indicate that it can be done much more quickly than we have been doing it, and I think you're right. Political leaders of various sorts are beginning to hear that. I think we did go through a period where climate change in the U.S. got very politicized and partisan, and I think that is beginning to shift again. I'm hearing from people on all sides of the political spectrum that even if they aren't quite as vocal, maybe if they've been on the right on this, that they are likely to be more so in the not too distant future. So I think there's a lot of hope that things will shift.
And Letitia, the healthcare industry, what are you seeing?
Well, for Dignity Health, it's absolutely important for us to certainly raise our voice to this issue. We have been partnering with Ceres, with BICEP, to really get our story out there. I think that our electeds, our policymakers, they're really wanting to hear what our story is. This is above, the political partisan fray. Our story is really about just telling the truth of what we care about. We care about the planet, we care about our families, we care about communities and the future. And we have a business model that's about looking at, what healthy communities can benefit from if we do the right things around climate solutions. For us, we have been so focused on how to address our climate change concerns through investments, Mindy. And just very recently, our board of directors have gone through a discernment process about how we could move our concerns, address our concerns through investments. And we have recently changed our policy. We've adopted a new policy to really look at how we could integrate environmental sustainability into our investment goals. And we've actually, I'm happy to say, instituted a new screen on thermal coal and are divesting from the worst of these thermal coal companies. So this is a story that I think that our electeds want to hear about, that we're doing something really positive around, how to move our business forward, how to meet our mission of healthcare, and how it is that we could really put ourselves out there to move the marketplace in a way where we're really supporting a clean energy economy.
Great. Couple more questions.
Okay, and actually we received one online as well, so maybe I could do that second.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. I represent the insulation industry. It's a group that from the get-go has been supportive for obvious reasons. The thrilling thing to hear you talk is that these are industry groups now that we're not necessarily selling into an industry, selling into the, so to speak, movement to make money, but rather responding to the need because of the science. The question I have for you, and it has to do with a political issue, the companies that are here, the ones that are really making the effort, do you have the effort back home? Because if the United States doesn't adopt the Clean Power Plan, much of what we're doing here may fall apart. Is there a concurrent effort within your companies to make sure your elected leaders, I know it's somewhat similar to the other question, but this drives deeper, are you going to do your homework at home to make sure that happens?
So I'm going to just short-circuit it because the answer is an emphatic yes. Every one of these 5 individuals have not only supported the Clean Power Plan, but most of them have been up on the Hill with us on a regular basis, standing up, shouting, putting their names on the line quite publicly in support of the Clean Power Plan. These are the leaders who are making the case that it is not only about the environment, but the Clean Power Plan, too, is about building a solid and strong economy.
And I saw another hand, and then I'll do the online question.
Thank you. It's Oleg Deripaska from Russia. You talk very right things, but there is a main problem. Coal countries will not disappear. And we need to find alternative process for coal processing. And since everyone avoid coal, for various reasons you describe, there is not much investment, in this direction. But we know how to process oil, we know how to process gas. We need to know how to make clean processing coal to make petrochemicals, which will be competitive. It's the first issue. And second, we need clear carbon pricing. Clear, one price for all. Otherwise, you will never match your investment, how you will evaluate. And this is 2 issues which I'd like to see what's your comment on.
Thank you. So clean coal and carbon price, and let me just get to this online question. It brings us sort of back to Paris here. There's been a lot of online chatter. I just want to distill it down to one question, which is, what kind of signal are you looking for in the INDCs, these national contributions that countries have put forward? Coming out of Paris, how do those sort of speak to you, and how do you interpret those into your actions in your business?
So let's see. Let's start with the second question, and anyone who wants to pick up the first as they deal with it, do so, or I'll address that later.
Just on the issue of the investment issues, those are potential signals to investors to open up their capital as well. That's the opening up that flow of capital from investors worldwide is something that has not reached nearly its potential. And given the needs that we have here, getting those market signals, I guess, is something investors need to see.
Yeah, maybe building on that, I think one of the things that we found powerful about this, start with the climate science and build your way out from there, is you stay focused on what really matters, which is reducing emissions. Now, in many cases, many entities, including us, have concluded that the easiest and best way for us to do that is drive energy efficiency and push more into renewables. But those are strategies, right? Other entities might conclude that different strategies are the right way to get to the outcome. It might be, clean coal or carbon capture or whatever, right? But, the key is to not get hung up on the strategy. It's the deliverable from the strategy, which is the emissions reduction. So if someone can find a way to do it with coal that has a good business case that solves for the emissions problem and other issues, great, right? I think we're not seeing that out there at the moment, but I think that's where innovation and technology and the case needs to be put together. In terms of the national contributions, I think our interest. So one of the great things about this narrative around our targets start with climate science and roll from there is it makes it very easy to explain why your targets are what they are. The problem is you're then left with sort of this monkey on your back of if everyone else isn't also chasing climate science, we still have to deal with all the consequences, right? Mars is not big enough that if we get our house in order, it's all okay. So we have an obligation and a desire to see everyone else chasing targets that are consistent with the science. So that's what we're looking for from national contributions. If everyone can't get there in one go, that's not great, but maybe it's okay for now. But that's where we want to see things moving to in the long run.
Well, to the extent private capital supplements that, I think that's the issue.
Well, and there's also an element of so when we do a project in the U.S. that reduces our electricity emissions in the U.S. to zero, that contributes to the U.S.'s GHG emissions target and makes it that much easier to achieve the national goals, right? So there's a synergy between the two. So.
Great. Any of our other colleagues, go for it.
I would just say, in terms of the INDCs, the most important piece of this is the Clean Power Plan, like we spoke about. And in the U.S., we have hundreds and hundreds of facilities, retail stores and offices that are in shopping malls, that are in office buildings. We can't just go put a solar panel system, and we can't even really do PPAs. It's tough. You can do virtual and there are other mechanisms, but we need actually the power companies to actually reduce their emissions if we're going to get to 100% renewable energy. We can't do this alone. And so with the nationally determined goals, it really does help us understand, especially with the Clean Power Plan, how that's going to start happening, and we can start focusing in on states where we have operations, understand what policy is happening there, and we can start investing and we can start relying on that state, especially as well as internationally. We can understand we have huge operations in Mexico, across Asia, throughout Europe. We need to understand what those countries are doing to meet those goals, and then that helps direct us in terms of what activities we're going to specifically do in those countries where we have manufacturing or distribution centers or offices. So incredibly important.
Right.
Yeah, and I would just say, we have made access to clean energy a key criterion when we site facilities. So the choices that countries are making, the choices that states in the U.S. are making, the policies that are there that enable choices on our part to actually then meet our goals, whether that's through direct purchases by us or it's through what's happening on the grid as a whole. That's really important. So that's a signal, I think, to us in terms of where are we going to invest over time. In terms of the point about we need to deal with coal and all sorts of other things that people aren't just going to stop using it overnight, which I think is almost certainly true. There are some things, technologies we have today, solar, wind, others that we can deploy today, and we could be deploying much faster. The technologies are there. The cost is such that it makes economic sense in more and more places. We need to deploy what we've got. There are ways in which we use energy today where those technologies may not be enough in and of themselves, and we need innovation. And that's one of the reasons why you've seen efforts by the US government and others in the past to innovate. It's one of the reasons why Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg and others announced a couple days ago a new innovation fund to really fund early stage R&D. We need that, and we need the deployment. We need to deploy what we've got, but we also need to innovate so that in 10 years or 20 years, we've got the solutions for the last 20% or 30% of emissions that we haven't gotten rid of yet.
In terms of the INDCs, we are completely ecstatic about the pre-submissions of the INDCs. This is definitely a different COP. It is one where we are seeing so many countries get on the bus. We're looking at a transparent and accountable process here, and it's really nice to be able to see what the bottom-up pledges are, and we are looking forward to seeing how we can meet what the under 2 degrees Celsius goal might be going forward by the various countries that are participating. We certainly would want to work as hard as we can to go back home to make sure that the Green Climate Fund is, that we keep our commitment and that the U.S. maintains its global leadership in that area.
Great. Let's take one more question and then we'll offer some closing thoughts.
No one ever wants to be the last question. I know that a few of you probably have them burning in your minds. Who's going to be the brave one?
Well, we've got a lot of smart people who are willing to provide their closing thoughts. Why don't we move into that? We are at COP. We are in Paris. It is crucial that we come out with a deal. I think everybody here is feeling optimistic, positive. Our investors and companies are telling you they need certainty. They eventually want to see a price on carbon, but they need a policy that allows us to know we could jumpstart the clean energy economy and move forward. The 5 voices here are not only depending on that kind of policy, but making it happen, here to push, here to articulate the economic case. Some final thoughts on what you think is going to happen and where you want to see us go coming out of Paris as well. We'll start at this end.
What is happening today and in these next days is a big deal. I've never felt so electrified working on climate change issues more than any other time than now. Healthcare certainly has a distinct voice in this debate. I welcome my other healthcare colleagues to step up to the plate and to really make the business case around health and healing, because at the end of the day, this is about you and me and our children and the future of this planet. And I think that we have so much to offer in terms of how to do business right, how to put our money where our mouth is in terms of how to support our climate goals. We're here to be a part of the solution, and I'm just so heartened by all of my colleagues and all of the businesses and companies that are here today to stand up to climate change and to say no more of inaction. And we're just so happy to be here.
Great.
I would echo, we're really thrilled to be here. This is actually my first COP, so I can't from direct experience talk about how it compares to previous ones, but I am very hopeful. I think the momentum that is building in the business sector, as well as in terms of commitments by countries and so on, is extraordinary. The number of companies who have stood up and not just said, we want to see a deal, but we want to see a deal and we're acting, and here's how this is affecting our actions today and our business in the future, I think is an enormous change from what's happened in the past. And I think the commitments we've already seen from countries make pretty clear, whatever the final form of the deal is, it will represent progress. And I think Kevin said this, that we shouldn't expect to come up with a deal that solves the problem. The technologies will keep changing, the markets will change. What we need to do is make significant progress and then look at it and see where we are and make more progress. And I think it is quite clear, whatever the result is in a week and a half, that it will represent real progress.
So my now 5.5-year-old son is telling everyone that I'm here saving the penguins, because that's what he understands. And so I said, yes, I'm here saving penguins. In this agreement, he said, Mommy, make sure they all save the penguins, because I want to see the penguins. So that's what I hope comes out of this deal. But seriously, though, I think business is the engine that's going to solve this at the end of the day. And I think the policy leaders need to decide if they want to make it easy or they want to make it hard. And that's really as clear as I can see it, because there is investment dollars waiting to just be funneled in to all of this. And I think companies, investors, everyone is just ready and waiting. And I hope that the leaders can hear loud and clear that if they can give us the strong signals, if they can put the policies and the mechanisms in place, businesses will step up and deliver any of that gap that the INDCs don't meet, and we're going to make it happen. So here's to a successful COP agreement. In the penguins.
So just like Bill, I was not 7 months pregnant at Copenhagen, and this is my first COP. And this is my first COP as well. So a little bit newer to the process. I think for me, the key takeaway is that, this is COP-21. There will be a 22, there was a 20, there was a 19, right? So this is a process that's about an objective that's a long game, right? Which is, you don't have one meeting, sort it and solve it, right? So, the thing that I think I'm particularly interested to understand coming out of this particular COP is what's the program and what's the process going forward to continue sort of raising the game and continue closing that gap between what the science says is necessary and the targets that are out there. Because we know we haven't closed the gap completely yet, although roughly half of it seems to have been closed, or sort of the numbers that you're seeing from most of the analyses. So there needs to be more, and making sure that we come out of here with a clear idea of how do we get to that more, over time, while we're working on the front end of the emissions reduction on the slope on the way down. So.
And again, policy clarity will bring financial definition to our risks as investors and give us a much better sense of where we can move capital for the opportunities. So we're looking forward to finally making those decisions and seeing the capital flow as much as it needs to, and working with corporate boards in a much more enlightened fashion.
Great. So the message could not be more clear here today, here in Paris at COP. One is the time to act is now. 2 is the scope must be audacious and big. 3 is it does not end when we leave Paris. We need to follow through on finding the resources, putting in place the policies, changing the way our companies act, our investors invest. You've got 5 leaders who have led the fight across the country in the United States and beyond, who are saying they're ready to step up and continue to fight leaving the COP. We have a problem that has to be taken on, whether it is about our children and your 5.5-year-old or my 25 and 20-year-old, all of our families. It is about the public's health. It is about national security. It is about our environment, and it is about the kind of economy we're willing to build and the world we're leaving for our children. To all 5 leaders up here, they are acting, they are doing, they are making change, and they are bringing a message of hope. I see nothing but progress going on and success coming out of Paris. Thank you all.